I always say that the best thing about consulting are the people that you work with. You're always working with the best, pushing each other to learn more, do more, be more, and go even further. Which is why I'm very excited to be able to go through these conversations with some of our alumni who've gone on to even greater success beyond their consulting career, and learn from them about the high points, the low points, the achievements, the wins, and the lessons that we can all take and apply in our future journeys. Shant Oknayan, welcome to Unscripted.
Thank you, Karim. Good to be here.
Look, these conversations are always fascinating for me. I learn a lot from them, and I'm definitely sure this is going to be one of them as well. And for those who don't know you, you've had a very long and distinguished journey, and we're still continuing the journey. But of course, the link with us is at some point you were working in consulting.
Absolutely.
Started in Italy. With your journey took you to many places. You have Italy, Europe, US, Middle East, you cover Asia as well, and Africa. So when you look back and when you think about all this sort of different places you worked, you lived, you interacted with, how do you think that's shaped you and the person that you are today?
Ooh, it's played a huge role. I'd argue that my background already was conducive to being somewhat branded as a globalista, right? I'm of Armenian origin. My parents were born and raised in different countries in the Middle East before moving to Italy, where I was born and raised. Mm-hmm. Went to an international school, then spent time, as you said, in the UK and the US, worked around Europe, when I started with booze, and then made my way to the Middle East. And more recently, obviously, been covering also part of the Eastern Hemisphere with my remit in Asia and Oceania, and now obviously Africa as well. So I'd argue that my professional journey kind of reinforces my background of being a globalista and being maybe a bit of a misfit in the sense that I can fit anywhere, but I don't necessarily associate with any specific cultural background or approach. But I think in today's world where we're living in an interconnected kind of setup where the globe is a lot smaller than what it was 20, 30 years ago, it's such an important attribute, being able to understand the way business is conducted in different realities. I was having a conversation with a partner of ours who's also had quite a colorful geographic journey. And the conversation we were having was that most people classify their skill set and themselves as their IQ and their EQ, right? Their intellectual quotient and their emotional quotient, their skill set and their mindset. And we were arguing that there's a third axis that I would call the CQ, the cultural quotient, right? Being able to understand how business is conducted in different places, what are the different nuances. We're not talking about stereotyping people, that's not the intent. But EQ maybe helps you understand the person in front of you. CQ, I'd argue, helps you understand the people that you're interacting with in any geography. So how I interact both explicitly and implicitly in Japan may be very different to the way I do it in Vietnam, or very different to the way business is conducted or social norms are seen in Saudi Arabia or in South Africa. I'd argue that it's probably one of the attributes I'm most proud of. And it's a never-ending journey. You can always learn about a new approach, a new culture, a new way of doing things by being exposed to people from different backgrounds.
Absolutely. In the context of business, because you've been in part of many large companies that are global in nature, that have offices everywhere. Today, you oversee many different regions. Not necessarily everyone in those regions has been to all the other regions, whereas Absolutely. Your job requires you to travel. How do you find that you need to sort of put in more effort to connect the dots for people so that they understand other regions or other client environments and so on?
Absolutely. Look, from my perspective, it's about exerting situational leadership, right? Where do I intervene kind of proactively to ensure people see their blind side or understand that they might have a blind side in the way they interact with one another? And where do I sometimes take a step back and let them figure that out? More often than not, I like to have very honest conversations with folks and ask them to be open-minded and to give people the benefit of the doubt, right? Don't assume bad intent because you might understand or misunderstand their perspective to be antagonizing to yours. It's just the way business may be conducted in that part of the world. And so it requires a lot of kind of situational awareness, both from my perspective to ensure that I can see what's not being said, right, and call it out. But it requires also open-mindedness from the people I'm interacting with to say, ooh, maybe I can learn a new way of doing things. I can give people the benefit of the doubt, right? And it starts kind of going into that being empathetic, being compassionate, understanding that there are different perspectives that are all valid. And that's the beauty of diversity, right? Diversity and inclusion gets thrown around quite a bit in the corporate world these days. And it's not just about gender or background. I think there's multiple layers to that around also neurodiversity. And the way people think is very much related to where they were raised, how they were raised, what kind of interactions they've had. And it's on us as leaders to understand that and to embrace that and exert situational leadership. But it's quite the journey to get everyone else to see things in the same vein.
Now, in looking back, yes, it's very obvious to see how you're sort of a global citizen. But was that something that was a drive in you? Was that part of your family environment or how you were raised, that you always saw the world as the stage that you'll be operating on as opposed to one particular part of it?
Look, I remember even growing up in Italy, quite a homogeneous country at the time, right? In the late 70s, early 80s. I was seen to be quite exotic, right? As someone of Armenian origin with a name that doesn't sound Italian, doesn't end in a vowel. And I remember going back to my parents and saying, feeling a little kind of wounded, right, that I couldn't fit in. And they're like, make it your superpower. Make it your superpower that you're different. Make it your superpower that you can potentially understand different perspectives that someone who's grown up, to your point, in a monodimensional situation may not. To me, that meant that I could, I'm not saying assimilate, but I could fit in very well and understand the nuances of each culture. And I did make it my superpower. And I think knowingly built on that during my professional career.
Yeah, that's a very nice segue to the next question I wanted to ask you, because when, so many times when we look at sort of LinkedIn profiles or a career progression, and yours is one of them, financial services, then consulting, then big tech. You've sort of ticked all the big tech, Google, Meta, now TikTok, ByteDance. It looks perfect. It looks so seamless. It looks like it was all a nice, well-planned step from going from one step to the other. But I'm sure it wasn't exactly the case. No. But at the same time, it does feel like there was sort of some deliberate thinking behind it. It doesn't come across as Shant just sort of took the next thing that came along kind of thing, because you've made jumps from different industries, and then within big tech itself, you've changed roles drastically in terms of the regions and so on. So, what is it? What was it that was driving your thinking or your moves as you went through your career journey?
Look, I'd argue that there was one fundamental truth across each of those decisions towards a new chapter, and that was, what am I solving for? Right? And that changes, but the question stays the same. So the answer changes at any given point in your career, but that's always been my go-to question, right? What am I solving for? And is the current reality fulfilling that? Or is this newer reality maybe a little bit more conducive towards that? So maybe I'll take you through a little bit of a journey, right? I went to engineering school and made my way into consulting because during that time I used to, when I was a student, I used to tutor the son of a managing partner at one of the big consulting companies in Italy. And he'd heard me explain things to his son, and he said, you know what, I love your logical step-by-step approach to the way you break down problems and help people see the solution. I think you'd make a great consultant. And so what I was solving for at the time was, I know what I think my strengths are, right? I was good at maths and physics, and seems like I had a knack for a logical breakdown of problems and hypothesis-driven approach and solutions, as we then discovered there's an actual framework around it. And I said, okay, then maybe I should go into consulting. That's what I'm solving for, building on my existing skill set. Because at the age of 21, 22, you don't have much more to offer than what you have then and there, which is, okay, I'm good at a few academic things, and maybe there's a few soft skills that I can build on. But once I entered consulting, I wasn't very picky in terms of types of projects I was doing, right? What I was solving for was, how can I learn as much as possible from as many different people and from different situations. So I did projects in automotive, I did projects in telco, I worked in Spain, I worked in Germany, I worked in the UK. I heard of fantastic projects that were being done in the Middle East back in 2003, 2004, put my hand up to move. And at the time they said, no, we want Arabic speakers, but then it ultimately worked out and it made my way here because in Europe I was doing cost-cutting projects, whereas here there was a lot of optimism. It was a build mode. It's like, why not? You know, Ski Dubai and free zones and e-government programs and what have you. And so I'm like, I want to experience that. I want to solve for, I want to learn an optimistic view to business, not just a cost-cutting reduction view to business. And that was my move to the Middle East. And as a result of working on big digital transformation programs, you know, what I decided I wanted to solve for in making them my move to Google was, well, I've been consulting on digital transformation. Why don't I actually go work for a digital giant and be part of their strategy? And that kind of instigated my move to Google. I went and became head of strategy at Google back in 2010, late 2010.
So, you know, frequently we have this interplay between consulting and industry. People in industry at some point like the idea of being in consulting, and people in consulting like the idea of being in industry. Was that part of the thinking as well, that you wanted to be on sort of the front line as opposed to advising
Absolutely.
the C-suite?
I wanted, I'd done 8 years of consulting at the time, so I'd seen varying degrees of clients and projects, etc. And what I was solving for by then is I want to hone into one thing, right? And I want to really become an expert at it and get depth on it and be also accountable for the outcomes of it, right? Hence my move to a digital giant. I was doing digital consulting. Let me do digital strategy or strategy for a digital giant. Hence my move to Google. But once I was at Google, I realized that, okay, corporate, great, there's a lot of learnings, etc. But I was missing a little bit of that entrepreneurial flair that in consulting you actually have, right? Because every situation's new. You have to figure out, okay, what's my approach here? How am I gonna, it might be an uncharted territory. What's the process I'm gonna take? What are the hypotheses I'm gonna validate or disprove? I was missing a little bit of that in the corporate world. And that's when I started exploring a startup, right? And with a few friends who all happen to be alumni as well, co-founded Glambox, which was our startup venture in the beauty e-commerce space. I knew nothing about beauty, I knew nothing about e-commerce, but what I was solving for was, I want to build something, right, that I can get messy with. There aren't like guidelines and guardrails on how to think about it, and that was my move into startups. And what started off as a cute little side project in the evenings and weekends, I remember our terrace was the warehouse, and I was a newlywed, so my wife's looking at me going, what's going on here, right? But we quickly raised money and ultimately decided, you know what, now's the time to try owning my own thing and running it successfully or not, and we'll see where that takes us. So that's what I was solving for. And so on and so forth. So every move, there's always been the same question of, what am I solving for right now with this situation? The answer changed, but the question was the same.
That's quite a risky move. So, one, where does this confidence come from? That you can just throw yourself, you know, because I presume at Google you had a very nice job,
it was
nice
fantastic.
title, good career,
Yes.
great company. You're throwing yourself into a startup. Yes, you had backing and you raised money, but still, it's a startup. The potential for failure was high, and in an area that you're not familiar with. Where does this confidence come from?
So a tweak the question to say potential for failure is potential for learning.
Yes.
Right?
Has that always been a perspective?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Why?
Look,
Why? It's not a normal perspective. Why? I mean, now it's very fashionable. Now, you know, Silicon Valley, every other day, some CEO is saying about failure and failure this and fail fast and all that wonderful stuff. But this wasn't, you know, back then, this wasn't the trendy thing to say. And especially in this part of the world, and to some extent,
it was
maybe.
a struggle. Yes.
Yeah. So, but where did that conviction come from?
Let's look at the facts. I was 32 at the time, right? I had 10 years at the time of great career and growth, and I wanted to keep investing in that. At 32, it's too early to kind of have a sense of appeasement and go, I don't want to take any risks. Well, what's the worst that can happen? The company shuts down? I'll get another job, right? And in fact, I'd argue that the learnings that I had at Glambox took me back to Google to lead their small, medium business because I had the experience of leading a small and medium business myself. So,
but that's a learning in hindsight. Was that part of the thinking?
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
But
wasn't that calculated?
I think there was a bit of a leap of faith to say, I want to learn. If I don't do this now, I might regret it one day. I might have a what if. Okay. And what's the worst that can happen? It goes belly up and I'm out of a job and I need to find a new one. So be it. In fact, I joined startup as the CEO the same month we had our daughter, August 2013.
Okay.
So two babies at the same time, right? A startup and a real one. And many said, you're a fool. What are you doing? Why are you adding so many?
Was your wife one of those many?
My wife's always been incredibly supportive in terms of saying, do what you know is going to drive your passion, because that's the person I know you to be, a passionate person. And if you're gonna start becoming a shell of yourself, that's not gonna be fun, right? I took a big salary cut. And, people glorify startups. At the time, there were a lot of Starbuckpreneurs, right? People sitting around Starbucks, chasing the entrepreneurial lifestyle. There's a lot of hardship with startups. I took a big cut, a lot of uncertainty. We had a 9-month runway financially, right? I had to build a team. In the meantime, there's diapers to be changed at home. My wife was home on parental leave. And another wrench in the system, we quickly discovered some health issues with my daughter. So things that you also maybe take for granted, I'm gonna be a first-time parent and all the glorious things of being a first-time parent I'm gonna get to experience. We didn't. And in hindsight, I look back at it and smile, but at the time I can tell you it wasn't rosy. It wasn't rosy. But that's when you truly learn who you wanna be, right? And what matters to you. Yes, I've always had naysayers, and every move that I've made, they're like, what are you doing? Why would you move and take that on? And then 12 to 18 months later, people are pinging me going, hey, can you tell me a little bit more about this? And do you have an opportunity for me to join you? And I'm not trying to rub it into people's face, and it's never, to your point, planned. It's not like, I know this is gonna be successful, but I think there's an appetite for risk to say, it's okay, right? As long as it's a learning opportunity and it's solving that itch, whatever that might be in that given moment. In my case, it's working, it's my own thing. I'm never gonna get another chance potentially to run my own startup. Let's give it my best shot. In fact, a year later, I went back into corporate because we had health issues with my daughter and I needed to bring some stability to our life. And a startup doesn't offer stability. So I went back to Google in full vulnerability and said, here's my situation, right? I made sure the startup got an additional fundraising. I brought in a new CEO. So my commitment to that baby was strong, and I stayed on as chairman of the board, etc. But then I went back to Google and said, here's my situation. Is there anything whereby you would see me being valuable? And they said, absolutely. You've just led a small and medium business, and we want to be more relevant in that sector. Can you come and lead that for us? So again, hindsight of, you have that learning, of course you're gonna, but every potential chapter, however much it may seem like a failure in that moment, is an opportunity for learning, and you can weave something out of it.
Okay. This is a very healthy perspective, not one that everyone is courageous enough to have, I think, but definitely one that's clearly present in your journey. I want to get back to some of the things you mentioned about your daughter and the priorities and so on, but let's finish the journey. So you went back to Google. And
went back to Google, led their SMB business, obviously, well, not obviously, but did well, things were going on the right path, etc. And then Meta reached out, Facebook at the time, and said, hey, you just led an e-commerce business, right? And we're trying to build our e-commerce kind of practice and services. Would you be interested? And after so many years at Google, I said, let me discover a different perspective, because these are corporations where the culture is very strong, right? And it's wonderful because you get to experience that strong culture, but it's not the only way of doing things. And again, in the spirit of learning and being a holistic digital strategist, because that's what I was solving for by then, I said, let me experience something new. And I was also solving for relevance. I'm like, okay, here's social media is the next evolution of the internet, right? Google was all about the knowledge graph and search and people explicitly looking for information. And then social media said, well, actually in the real world, people discover things by word of mouth. And we're gonna create digital word of mouth, social media. And so I said, okay, it solves for relevance. It solves for my quest to be a holistic digital strategist. It further hones my whatever experience I had leading an e-commerce company. Let me join and see if I can build something out of that. And again, a lot of naysayers saying you're leaving something very stable, great business, big team. And I'd argue some people get blinded by that from an ego trip perspective. Look how many people I was managing, etc. I'll give you an anecdote, right? I was an engagement manager here when I left for Google. I went to becoming an individual contributor at Google. And people are like, why would you move away from being a team lead and take a step back? I'm like, I'm not taking a step back. I'm taking a step deeper into a specific area. It was the same when I made the move from Google to Meta. It was a smaller team, a smaller book of business, but it was build mode as opposed to optimize mode. And I'm a builder. I can optimize, but it's not the thing that gives me most energy, right? So moved it to Meta to build their e-commerce business. Over time, kind of took on all of their corporate development and was directing all of their business in the region. And then ByteDance came along, TikTok came along and said, look, we're looking to build in the region. At the time it was Middle East and North Africa and Turkey. Seems like you've got some valuable experience and expertise. Would you be interested? And again, going back to my question, what am I solving for? I said, well, I've 4 things, and I'll discuss 3 of them. First was, I've worked for Western companies for over 2 decades of my life. And in this day and age, again, if I want to be a holistic digital strategist, I need to experience the beast from the East, right? I need to experience the innovations that are coming out of the Eastern Hemisphere. Now, I could go and work for an Eastern company, right? A Baidu, a Tencent, an Alibaba, but the pendulum might have swung a little too far from a cultural perspective to my comfort zone or where I knew how to navigate things. ByteDance to me represented the first kind of global tech reality of Eastern heritage. So that was kind of the first, okay, I get to experience Eastern, but in a global setting. The second was the evolution of digital media, and you and I have spoken about this. It went from the portals in the late 90s. It was about the context editor put content. You liked it. You liked cars. You went to the automotive section, etc. It evolved into Google, the knowledge graph. I'm explicitly looking for information. It then evolved into social media, as we discussed, digital word of mouth. And I'd argue that the next evolution was kind of the content graph. I don't care what you're explicitly looking for. I don't care who your friends and family and people you follow are, your echo chambers. The algorithm, the AI, is smart enough to figure out what content is relevant to you. I'd missed the kind of portal phase, right? I was in consulting at the time. I was at Google during their kind of, when the knowledge graph was the thing. I was at Meta during the social graph era. And content graph, I want to be relevant. What better company to do it at than the folks who kind of invented all of that. So that was kind of the second reason. The third reason is I'm a builder, I'm not an optimizer. So after 4 and a bit years at Meta, and it's never about a timestamp, but things plateau over time. I'm like, okay, things are in place, things are in motion, I'm tweaking here and there, but am I really getting my hands dirty in uncharted territories, green fields as opposed to brown fields that I'm working, and someone's giving me the keys to the kingdom to say, build it, however scrappy it might be. So that was the third reason. The fourth reason was, I don't know, in the spirit of being vulnerable, I'd miss the IPO at Google, I'd miss the IPO at Facebook, and shame on me if I potentially miss what could be the next big kind of unicorn that goes public.
So Shant, what I find interesting is when you're describing what you're solving for, it's very structured, very analytical. But as you're recounting your journey, there were times when you'd made the decision, but there were times when, as you said, Meta reached out, ByteDance reached out. So were you looking, and because you had done the analysis, and then thinking or because it came then I analyzed? So because it's when somebody looks at the LinkedIn or at the journey, they're always thinking, oh, so well planned, but it's not. You're reacting to context that came from as a result of people know you, they've heard of you, and so on. But it's a mixture. But then you are doing the structured analysis and the thinking to decide if it's been a mix. And what I really find interesting is the story about, because if we tie everything in the thread, if you hadn't been a tutor to somebody whose father was an MD in a consulting firm, would you have been on a completely different path?
I was going to be a doctor at some stage.
Wow.
Right. I was going to do engineering and then go into medical school and be an orthopedic surgeon. And again, that was because of an experience I'd lived. I'd broken both knees, playing sports, and I'd had surgery. And I was fascinated by the way the human body can be fixed mechanically. So yeah, I took a 180 there. Look, going back to whether it was planned or reactive, it's, for the most part, it's always been reactive. But it's been an openness to inputs that I've received. So we've discussed specific inputs that I've received. The MD of a consulting company, Google coming and reaching out, Meta with your e-commerce experience, etc. But there were so many other potential avenues I could have taken. And the perspective has always been, why not listen to whatever opportunity is coming your way? Not because you're actively looking to make a change, but it gives you an additional input into whatever you're solving for. And I've said no thank you to many things, right? But it's been an additional input as to what is it that I'm passionate about and what not. And what you're hearing is the input that I decided to lean into.
Yes.
But for every input, there's probably another 20 that I took that input and said, ooh, this further hones what it is that I'm interested in doing and not. So I'd argue that there was planning in terms of being open to whatever input comes your way, whatever opportunity comes your way, but being reactive to the opportunity that best answers what am I solving for.
Yeah, I find this a common theme, that so many of the things that happen to us in life are as a result of us being willing to, or first understanding the opportunity that's coming our way, and then actually being willing to throw ourselves into it, which clearly you've done many times over. Interesting. All right, I wanna, you mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned egos and titles and how people perceive their self-worth, which is very common in the business world. But I think sometimes people who go through personal experiences that sort of reset their view of what's important and what really is the whole reason for being on this planet sometimes, it gives them a different perspective. And you briefly hinted at having medical issues that you discovered with your daughter. So tell me, get into as much detail or little detail as you're comfortable with, but tell me, how did that affect your view of life versus career, priorities, where am I spending my time, family versus work?
I'd argue that it's been the single most transformative element of my life. So I'm very open about this because it really has shaped me as a person and as a business leader, etc. My daughter, who's now 11, has a rare genetic disorder. We discovered that there was something not typical in her development early on, within 2-3 months of her life. And again, I was in my startup at the time. And we went on a quest then to figure out what the situation was. And over the years, we finally, after digging and digging and digging, figured out what the situation was. She has a rare genetic disorder. It manifests itself in so many different ways. But the so what of all of this is it recalibrated what's important, big time. Before that chapter, I was very self-assured. I wouldn't say arrogant. I've always been taught to be quite humble as well in the way I carry myself. But it made me realize that the shininess of my job, how fast track I am in my promotions, my title, etc. Doesn't really matter in the grander scheme of things. My role, my legacy, for the most part, and for most people, is going to be their family, what values and what behaviors they exhibit, and then they pass on to the future generations. whether at home and then as a leader, obviously in the workplace as well, right? The reason why we're having this conversation. Yeah. So she really shaped up kind of my perspective on what's important and what's not, but also how I carry myself in the office. It taught me the value of service-based leadership. That as a leader, I'm not there to, chest pump as a gorilla and kind of say, the big boss has walked in. That's not the point, at least in my perspective of what you're at the service of the organization. You're there to enable people to be the best version of themselves. Because that's the role that I'm playing, and my wife in particular, and obviously I'm very involved as well. That's what we're playing with our daughter. How do we enable her to be the best version of herself? And I hope I'm translating that in the workplace as well with this concept of servant leadership, service-based leadership, which is not a new concept, but I think it's becoming more front and center these days. It taught me the value of true diversity, right? Not just what's on paper. We spoke briefly about neurodiversity and the different approaches, different ways of doing things. It taught me patience in terms of when you're hearing an opinion or a thought from someone who is very different to you, give them, again, patience in terms of not cutting them off, listening, hearing them out, and realizing that there may be merit to what they're bringing to the table, even if it's not a like-minded approach, right? So many organizations try to chase conformity because it's easier to manage. If I find like-minded people, we'll just get along better. But what that means is that you're solving always in an echo chamber. Diverse perspectives just help you see things in your own blind side, right? So to me, that diversity, but also inclusion, right? There's that old saying, diversity is inviting someone to the party. Inclusion is asking them to dance. I think my daughter's situation has taught me to always think about who doesn't have a voice in the room and to ensure that they're being heard out. So it's been enlightening. It's given me a perspective on what matters, not to take things too seriously in the workplace, right? There's bigger, broader matters in life, and that you can't plan for things always. You might be chasing that promotion, it doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world. It really isn't the end of the world. In the grander scheme of things, 5-10 years down the line, that 6-month delay, you're not even gonna remember. There's broader things in life that matter, and she's taught me that.
Has she having to give more, because there's this mythical figure about the working, the dad who's the corporate hero and the great career and so on, and throwing himself in, and then sometimes we glorify long hours, and we glorify how much of ourselves we give to work. Has having your daughter and the attention that you need to give her changed how much you give of yourself to work versus family, or was that something you were already? No,
that's evolved because of Lilia, my daughter. I'd argue that it's never kind of a balanced view. Work-life balance, this is controversial, but work-life balance, it's easier said than done. I think life is cyclical. Sometimes you'll give 80 at work, 20 at home. Sometimes you'll give 80 at home, 20 at work. And it's about you deciding what matters in that specific moment in your life, right? This summer, I spent 5 weeks with family away on holiday. I was working some of that time, but most of it I was with them, right? I made a conscious decision to prioritize life in that case. When I made the move to TikTok, we were expecting our second child. And the conversation I had with Talar, my wife, was, hey, I'm very comfortable at Meta. I have a team that is exceptional. Results are good. I'm going to get parental leave for 6 months. Or I could jump onto this new entrepreneurial thing called TikTok, where I'm going to have to build things. It's going to be long days out of choice and necessity to build the business. My parental leave is going to be 2 days. What do you think? And a great judge of characters are like, what? Where am I going to see the true Shant shine, right? And chase that. And because if you're happy with what you're doing in the corporate world, that's going to translate also at home. So it's not about the long hours and this work-life balance of it's 6 p.m. shall I go home, etc. It's more of, okay, am I Am I enjoying what I'm doing? Is it okay for me? I want to spend this additional time solving a difficult business problem. Or you know what? I'm going to carve out time, which I have, by the way. My calendar has blocks for specific moments that are important for my family, right? I try to carve out 8 to 10 a.m. for school drop-offs. 6 to 8 p.m. is bedtime. No meetings there. 95% of the time I manage to make that happen. 5% of the time, again, something gives where you need to make an intentional choice of saying, I'm going to have to break my own rule there. Or my social contract with my wife, with all the travel that I do towards Asia, is you can't travel back-to-back weeks. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense, right? Because you need to make sure that you're not over-investing in one area versus the other for longer periods of time. So yes, her situation has definitely made me kind of rethink a little bit how I approach the workplace. But it hasn't kind of swung the pendulum the complete other way to say, that's it, I don't want to work hard, push hard, etc. That's not the point. It's more of, okay, what am I solving for in any given moment, and prioritizing accordingly.
The what am I solving for theme is prevalent throughout. It's always sort of taking the inputs of the environment and deciding there and then what is the best course of action. Interesting way of going through life. And also the fact that once you start having a wife, family, you also need to bring them into the conversation. So that's clearly also coming through your
I'm trying.
Answers. I'm sure if I had her, because this is probably similar to everybody. If the spouse was the one doing the interview, they probably have a different perspective.
She may be a little bit more nuanced on whether I'm at 95% or 70%, objective achieved.
Looking back, anything that you would say to younger Shant to do differently or to keep in mind now that you know what the journey has been so far?
Be your fiercest supporter, but your harshest critic. I see many people do one or the other, not both. A lot of overachievers tend to have imposter syndrome, and therefore they're their harshest critic, and they're always second-guessing themselves. And it's like, should I do this? And what do people think, etc. And conversely, many of them might be on a bit of an ego trip and kind of be their fiercest supporter, and they think that they're owed everything, right? Oh, but I delivered on this. Why am I not getting the promotion or the title or the broader mandate, etc.? This disparity between expectation and reality, there's that equation of happiness, expectation minus reality is what whether you're positive or negative on the happiness spectrum. I'd argue it requires both. It requires you being your harshest critic. How can I be better? A better version of myself. But then your fiercest supporter to go, I need to believe in myself and what I bring to the table, without arrogance, but with self-assurance. And this would probably be something I'd remind myself if I had a time capsule and could go back.
So sometimes I think when we do have time travel, would we all go back and tell these things to ourselves?
Yes.
It's hard to tell whether this is what you should have done or the fact that what you went through actually got you to this conclusion. And if you didn't go through that specific journey, you would not have the same advice.
Absolutely. I think the outcome would be very different.
Yeah. Right. So you're in one of the companies right now that is probably at the epicenter of what's happening to how we consume media and how technology impacts our lives. But you also have young children.
Yes.
Your kids are how old?
11 and 4.
Okay, so at stages of life where they can be easily influenced
Absolutely.
by what they're consuming, but at the same time you're arguably at one of the companies that has figured out to the best the best at the planet right now in terms of figuring out how to keep people interested and engaged in content. And we have AI coming in now. TikTok was using AI before, and AI was fashionable. You were using other means of AI. So that's a big driver of how you work and how you succeed. It's changing how content is created. It's changing how we interact with each other.
Yes.
If you put all of this together, as a father, but also as an executive, how do you see the effect of all this technology on us as a society, and how do you balance the need for your children to be aware and to be masters of technology, but at the same time, still not let it consume them?
This is probably the question that is most top of mind for us as a company, for us as parents, right? My wife and I. There's a few things that I think about when looking at this question. The first is I'm reminded of the Mediterranean diet that I grew up with, everything in moderation, right? Overindulgence in anything is not good. And that applies to social media and content platforms as well. Now, the tech platforms like ourselves can provide all the tools to ensure limits on screen time, reminders, etc. But think of that as almost the hardware, right? In your conversation with your children. Hey, I'm going to put in guardrails and what content you can see and can't see, filters. These are all tools that are actually available, and I'd urge every parent to actually not dismiss any platform as, oh, this is what the kids do, but actually to say, if this is where my kids are spending their time on, I need to first and foremost master what it's about and what tools and guardrails are available that I can use to safeguard my child. But then there's the software side of things, I'm using that as an analogy, of parenting, right? Again, I've seen many parents dismiss the latest game, the latest social media platform, the latest content platform, the latest tech evolution. Oh, this is what kids do, and I'm too old to understand this. Why are you too old to understand this? And if your kids are spending time on it, why aren't you making the effort to spend time on it? And why aren't you having conversations with them around critical thinking? Hey, here's the good that can come out of social media platforms and content platforms, but let me highlight also the bad that can come out of it. We have conversations around cigarettes, we have conversations around alcohol, right? And sexual education in certain cases as parents. Why aren't we having that conversation when it comes to the fair and right use of tech? While tech platforms continue to embrace what is this whole theme of responsible innovation. That is core, by the way, of every tech company. And it's not just a party line. Because without that trust from the users, the creators, the business community, government, media, etc., there's no business. So trust is priority 0 for all of these tech companies. And the only way you can build trust is by showing that you're making steps forward in addressing the darker side of technology. By providing those tools, those guardrails, by keep honing that AI to ensure it doesn't have hallucinations or that it's not giving incorrect views, to ensure that there's the fine line between a good use of a platform versus addiction is not being broken, etc. But then that alone is not enough. The parenting matters as well in the education system. There's certain countries that do a wonderful job at this, think the Nordics, etc., at teaching critical thinking. How do you distill between what's misinformation and real information, right? It's a momentous year. There's, I think, over 60 elections happening in the world, and tech is a force for good. And I've seen it, by the way, with my own daughter. I found a community of parents who have children with the same rare genetic disorder. So it can be a force for good, but it can be also a force for bad actors of trying to influence outcomes, etc.
So you mentioned critical thinking. Also, you mentioned empathy, EQ, CQ, IQ, all different aspects. And then now, if we look forward and see what Gen AI is doing, providing access to knowledge and maybe giving tools to a lot more people that would allow them to get a level of expertise that before perhaps took years of a career, and you have young children, at some point you're going to start thinking about what should they be studying or learning. You have younger employees, I'm sure, who you want to develop into the leaders of tomorrow. What skill sets beyond the ones we mentioned do you think are the ones that we need to focus on right now?
Look, let's build on, and you and I have had this conversation, let's build on the fact that AI is not going to replace, it's going to augment, right? AI to me is augmented intelligence, not artificial intelligence. Human ingenuity is still going to be a cornerstone of innovation. It's just going to be amplified and enabled by AI, right? And therefore, if that's the fundamental truth, right, what skill sets would I want my children to kind of hone? And what is it I advocate to kind of my organization, who tends to have a slightly younger than average age of employees? It's these skills around critical thinking, creativity, being able, it's the mindset side of things as opposed to the pure kind of academic side of things, right? What I learned 25 years ago in university is irrelevant today anyway. But what university in that particular kind of situation gave me was how to think about problem statements, how to build hypotheses, how to prove or disprove them. How do I then marry that scientific thinking with some more kind of artsy thinking, the creative side, the ingenuity of, yeah, okay, fine, the facts say this, but there's an inkling that says maybe I can approach it this other way. Let me put a softer hypothesis in trying to address that situation. I think that is, those are the attributes and the behaviors and the values that I'd love my children to kind of hone, rather than kind of the hard skills of I'm great at Excel and I understand the latest, physics classes and things of the sort, because guess what? It's relevant today, it's obsolete tomorrow already. So how do you create this virtuous cycle of constant learning, of constant self-improvement? If I can instill that in my children, I will deem myself to have done at least part of my job.
Shant, we've gone through a fascinating journey. What's the next chapter?
Oh, I don't know. We'll see what inputs come my way, and I'll apply my usual, what am I solving for, and we'll take it from there.
Sounds good. It's worked so far, so I see no reason why not to keep adopting that approach.
Absolutely.
Shant, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for
Thanks
your
for
time
having me,
today.
Kareem.